What role does technology play in the growth of modern nation states? Does technology create and preserve individual freedom? What happens when our government regulates innovation or fails to do so? And why is being selfish good?
If you think about what selfish really means, selfish means taking care of self. It means pursuing a successful life, achievement, growth. It means flourishing, human flourishing, and ultimately happiness.
Yaron Brook, chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, joins me to analyze these timely and important topics. Yaron is the best-selling author of Free Market Revolution, Equal is Unfair, and In Pursuit of Wealth. Yaron received his MBA and PhD in finance from the University of Texas at Austin. He served as finance professor for 7 years at Santa Clara University and co-founded BH Equity Research, a private equity and hedge fund manager.
Be willing to sacrifice yourself for other people. That is infecting our foreign policy. It's infecting the way we view successful companies. It's affecting the way we view success versus failure. It's affecting everything.
Ayn Rand's objectivism philosophy is rooted in the principles of reason, rational self-interest, individualism, and laissez-faire capitalism. In Rand's words, my philosophy, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. But the best way to learn about objectivism, in my opinion, is through Rand's books. So if you haven't read them yet, I suggest you start with Atlas Shrugged, a true classic. Yaron, your work is important, and for that, I am grateful. Thank you again for joining me on my show. Yaron, it's great to see you today. Thank you for joining Some Future Day. How are you?
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Marc.
Let's start with objectivism. It seems like we're in a world right now that could be categorized as too selfish, yet Rand has written quite a bit, and you have spoke quite a bit on why the concept of selfish is important. I'm wondering if you could break that down for me, please.
Well, God, when I think about the world right now, I don't think selfish. I think self-destructive. I think suicidal, which is the exact opposite of selfish. If you think about what selfish really means, selfish means taking care of self. It means pursuing a successful life, achievement, growth. It means flourishing, human flourishing, and ultimately happiness. And yet we live in a society where people are depressed and feel guilty, and where we seem to engage in political insanity. And we seem to be committed to both national and almost international regression, not progression, not growth, not success, on pretty much every front, socially, economically, culturally, in every front, we seem to be going backwards. So Ayn Rand stood for the idea of rational self-interest, of long-term rational self-interest, which she considered selfishness right? To be selfish, to take care of self, meant to be rational, meant to think long-term. And to think long-term, not to emote, not to do whatever you felt like doing, not to pursue your whim, but to be rational, to think, to engage in actual, with reason. So, no, we live in the exact opposite of a selfish world. We live in a very self-destructive. And if you look at our foreign policy, for example, which is everywhere these days, it seems like we are committed to self-sacrifice, not to self-promotion, but self-sacrifice. We seem to be willing to lay down for the weakest players out there in the world, and not actually fight and promote our own interests.
But don't we owe it to the world? Isn't it like, doesn't the United States have to be in that position where we're helping all of these communities? I think yesterday you might have seen the State Department issued a letter surrounding the president of Iran's death. It almost seems insane to me that here's an individual who's responsible for killing literally thousands and thousands of people dating back to the revolution. They clearly don't like the United States and everything we stand for, but yet our State Department is issuing an apology. I think our one of our members of the United Nations stood up in deference to this.
They had a moment of silence at the Security Council in the United Nations. I mean, what a travesty of justice. I mean, how if you're a young woman in Tehran who has been demonstrating against the regimes forcing you to cover your to cover your body and your hair and your face, and you've seen your friends being murdered by this regime, and you've seen young men and young women who've stood up to the regime hanged from cranes in the middle of town, and then you see the world, the United States and others, paying their respects to this monster who died over the weekend. It just must be horrible for you. It in many respects is the opposite of kind of I think the attitude, that to some extent somebody like Ronald Reagan represented vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, where I think that the dissidents in the Eastern Europe took courage and gained a certain moral confidence because he dared to stand up to the monsters, or at least verbally stand up to them. But look, this is American foreign policy forever. I really wonder. I should do the research. Did the State Department issue the same kind of thing when Stalin died or when Mao Zedong died? I wouldn't be surprised if they did, if they shared condolences to people who murdered tens of millions of people. So, yeah, I mean, this is so antagonistic to everything this country stands for. And if you think about the poor, let's think about what America owes the world, if it owes anything. Think about the poor and the oppressed in the world. What are the poor and the oppressed of the world? What could America do that would benefit them the most? Well, what America could do to benefit them the most is live up to its principles. That is, America as a symbol, America as a torchbearer of liberty and freedom is an incredibly powerful force in the world. The reality is that in the post-World War II era, country after country after country became freer, not because of American military might, not because we gave them foreign aid, but because they didn't want to be poor, and they had a model, which was the United States, an imperfect model, but it still was a model. We've given up on that model. I mean, we gave it up years ago. Certainly, I consider the Obama administration to be the first anti-American administration. Trump didn't do any better. We're just one more country. Who cares? We kill journalists just like Putin does. There's no difference between us and the Russians. We've given up on Shining City on the Hill. We've given up as a model for liberty, for freedom. We've even now given up, both in the Trump and the Biden administrations, on foreign trade, which is one way in which we enrich the world by trading with them, value for value, win-win relationship. So, and instead, we are groveling before them and sacrificing for them, and we spend billions on foreign aid, often to our enemies, not to our and we have demonstrations in the streets when we give the foreign aid to our friends, and nobody makes a peep. You don't hear a sound when we give foreign aid to our enemies. So, no, America, and more importantly, America doesn't owe anybody anything. America didn't achieve its wealth by exploiting others. America didn't achieve its wealth by sacrificing other people. America achieved its wealth quite the opposite, by focusing on protecting the individual rights of its own citizens, allowing its citizens to be free. As imperfect as we did it, we never achieved perfection at that. That's how we achieved our success. And to the extent that America is successful, to the extent America is rich, to the extent that America is open to the world, to that extent the rest of the world benefits from that. And to the extent that America serves as a moral ideal, it benefits the world. But sadly, we seem to be completely rejecting that and denying all that and turning our back on ourselves, and as a result, on the world as well.
So, you talk about this irrational behavior where the United States has been funding enemies. And I think it's quite obvious and fair to say that we even funded Hamas. We're living in like the age of dumb. It's almost like the world has turned upside down with regards to being rational and realistic. Do you think there's assuming you agree with me, was there like a specific demarcation in time, Yaron, where like all of a sudden like just the obvious and the common sense approach to the world just turned upside down, and now we've entered this age of dumb?
I mean, we've definitely entered an age of dumb, but I would argue there's a sense in which we've always been dumb. We've never quite recognized what made ourselves great. We've never embraced reason and rationality fully. We've never embraced, actually looking at the world and being realistic about what's going on in the world fully. I mean, look at Chamberlain in Munich with Hitler. I mean, how dumb do you have to be to think that you're going to bring peace to the world? Or look at it, America in 1917, entering World War One. Why? I mean, the tens of thousands, or maybe it's thousands of Americans who died over there in Europe. What did they achieve? What was the purpose? What were we doing it for? I mean, there's so much. Or the founding. I mean, go back to founding fathers. Do you really think that you can live with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and slavery, and this won't be a disaster? I mean, isn't that kind of obvious that's going to lead to bloodshed and horrors? So there's a sense in which we've never really been willing to commit ourselves to reality, to pursuing what makes sense, and to pursuing logic and rationality. And there's and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, the first question you asked me is that we reject this idea of self-interest. We reject the idea of individual rights, and certainly over the last 100 years we've done it. And so I think what the consequence is over the last, I'd say, 100 years, we have systematically, slowly gotten dumber, if you will. Or I would say not dumber, but less rational, more irrational, less caring about the individual, less caring about what the country really stood for, less an understanding of the Constitution and Declaration at every level. I don't think today, of the 9 Supreme Court justices, I don't think there's one. I really don't think there's one who understands the Constitution, understands the Declaration of Independence, because not a single one of them could define individual rights if you ask them. Say, what is the definition of individual rights? What do individual rights actually mean? Not a single one of them. These are the Supreme Court. Now, I think that's been true for probably 100 years. So I think the deterioration started 100 years ago. I think that that the shocks of 9/11 and the great financial crisis and COVID, each one of them made us a little dumber in a bigger kind of, they were shocks to the system. We were heading in that direction anyway, but these were shocks to the system that emboldened our enemies. Our response to them was so pathetic, to each one of them. Our response was so pathetic, so anti-American, so ridiculous that they just emboldened the anti-Americanism that is embedded in America, all the anti-American sentiments that is embodied in the left and I think in the right have come to the surface. And now we're reaping the evil that is the result of all that. But really, I think over the last 20 years, 9/11, financial crisis, COVID, are monumental events that we'll look back historically and say, that's when the world changed. Those 3 events really changed America for the worse.
Yaron, it's almost like there's this like psychological barrier where individual Americans don't want to boast about the accomplishments, the successes, and the values of American ingenuity, American entrepreneurship, capitalism. We're almost operating at a mass level now from a place of appeasement, from a place of almost embarrassment. And I'm curious if you agree with me. Why, right? Why are, again, staying on this concept of the age of dumb, which I'm just like throwing around with you right now. Why won't the Americans be proud of individual freedom, individual liberty? Why are we timid with regards to boasting about these incredible values that are embedded in our Constitution?
Well, because our intellectuals have long abandoned the idea that economic and technological progress are virtues. And they've abandoned the idea that you should be proud. I mean, that's true. I mean, in Christianity, being proud is a vice, and the left considers individual pride a vice. As Obama reminded us You didn't build that. You didn't do it. It's community. It's whatever. We live in a world where intellectuals teach us that everything is deterministic. So you can't take credit for anything. It's just your genes and your upbringing, and you're just a cog in a machine. This is what Obama was projecting. But this has deep philosophical roots in academia. The left is dominated by egalitarianism that says we're all basically the same, and we should be treated, not just treated by the law, but we should all have the same outcome, and that is an ideal, a kind of an egalitarian ideal. And indeed, if you are successful, you must have done it at somebody's expense. You are therefore an oppressor. And if you are poor or unsuccessful, you must have been held back, so therefore you are oppressed. And our Christian morality, which still dominates everything that we do, even among atheists, the Christian morality that says that your meek shall inherit the earth, that we should sacrifice to the poor, that the poor are the standard of value. It basically reinforces this idea that the oppressed are the good. Again, the poor are the good, and the oppressors, the successful, are bad. And so you've got both on the right and on the left forces, intellectual forces, that manifest themselves in the culture in a variety of different ways, but intellectual, powerful forces saying, look, the real value in life is among the oppressed, and those who are the oppressors should be held back, should be restrained. And we see that in everything. You see, that affects our economic policy. We hate successful businessmen. We hate successful businesses. So even right now, the FCC and the government is going after all these successful, amazing companies. I mean, just some of the greatest companies in human history. And they want to break them up because they have monopolies. And monopolies usually raise prices. And you go, what price has Google raised, right? Where's Google hurting me exactly? But it doesn't matter. They're the evil. And by the way, again, this is bipartisan. So J.D. Vance, who is an up-and-coming superstar on the Republican side, is a huge fan of Lena Khan's, who is the current chairman of the FCC, who is associated with the left. And the left and the right, again, are uniting in their hatred of successful business and successful technological business. So intellectually, because of a morality that says the meek are the virtuous, success is to be viewed with suspicion and broken up politically. Altruism, that's the morality that says other people, that's what you should care about morally. You should be willing to sacrifice yourself for other people. That is infecting our foreign policy. It's infecting the way we view successful companies. It's affecting the way we view success versus failure. It's affecting everything that how we view the world around us. And your terminology, it's altruism in a sense and unreason that are making us dumb. Those are the causes, the intellectual causes.
It just seems so irrational. Like you use this 100-year mark as a way to highlight. And if you think back over the past 100 years, I'm sure you would agree, like the most relevant, the most profound nations have been those that embraced entrepreneurship and technology and growth. Yet now we're in this moment in time, as you noted, where almost free market capitalism is being shunned. In your opinion, like why does democracy need free market capitalism today more than maybe over the past 2-3 decades?
Well, I mean, we've always needed capitalism, and we've been, again, moving away from free market capitalism for a long, long time. I don't think we've ever had what I would consider perfect free markets. I think we've always wanted to regulate them and control them. We've never trusted markets, sadly, tragically, really, because I think that as a consequence, we're poorer. I think as a consequence, we're less free. But certainly sometime around the early part of the 20th century, probably around 1913-14 with the administration of Woodrow Wilson, we started a slow turning away from everything has to do with free markets and capitalism. FDR moved us dramatically away from free markets. And since then, we've kind of been drifting downwards. We've allowed certain industries in particular to stay free enough so that they continue to innovate and they continue to move us forward. But even there's a limit to how much freedom we allow. And right now we're reaching a point where, okay, tech industry, we've allowed you enough freedom. You've grown. You're too big now. We don't like you. So we're going to start regulating you as well. And we're killing the golden goose. We're killing, what actually sustains the U.S. economy and moves it forward, which is Silicon Valley and its equivalents around the country. It is that spirit of entrepreneurship. It is that spirit of innovation. It's that spirit that says we can do anything, and we're going to try, and we're going to explore, and we might fail, but who cares? We'll just try again later. That spirit is slowly being squeezed by our regulators. That spirit, by the way, was long ago killed in other industries. It's somehow sustained itself in tech, and now it's slowly being squeezed, and they're trying to kill it in tech as well. And then what, right? And then it's a slow decline from there because there's nothing else. There's no other place where we still allow people to actually have any semblance of freedom.
Well, it's kind of funny, like when you talk about big tech and regulation, I think it's an interesting analysis to look at big tech and then the young emerging entrepreneurial businesses and that dynamic as it relates to regulation. So, for example, I believe that a lot of these big tech leaders, Zuckerberg, Altman, et cetera, are getting in front of Congress and calling to be regulated in a way that's totally disingenuous. Really, what they're looking to do is, I think they're saying, like, regulate us for quote unquote safety reasons. But in reality, they're just trying to stay the monopolies that they are. They want to grow their power. But effectively, that will have a chilling effect, theoretically, on the entrepreneurs, on the small businesses that will push our marketplace forward. So I'm curious, like, if you see that dynamic
I agree with most of that, but put yourself in Zuckerberg's shoes, right? So what was it? About 10 years ago, Congress starts inviting you in front of it and starts lambasting you for doing what you do and saying to you, we're going to crush you unless you change. We're going to regulate you. We're going to control you. We are not going to let you stay free. And Zuckerberg keeps hearing this message over and over again. He's trying to run a company. He's trying to do his best, and yet they keep coming after him. And they were after him, right? In 2015, 2016, Russian interference, all of this stuff, whatever. And he's saying, look, I don't want any of this. I don't want politics. I'm not. And they're saying, doesn't matter. We're coming after you. So then he goes home and he says, okay, they're coming after me. What am I going to do? Am I going to just lay here like a nobody and let them, do whatever they want to me? Or am I going to try to mold this and shape this so that I can come out of it okay? And now, he could have maybe fought it, and I think he started to at some point, but he got crushed. He got crushed by the press, he got crushed by the public, and he got crushed by politicians. He decided, I can't fight them. I can't just roll over. So I'm going to try to manipulate them. And that's a choice he made. Is that the wrong choice? I would have loved to see him fight. I would have loved to have these. I mean, my dream is for Congress to invite one of these businessmen over and for the businessman to show up. And after the first question, to stand up and say, I do not recognize your authority to demand that I be here. I will not answer your questions. You don't know my business. You don't know anything about me. You're all a bunch of losers who've never employed anybody and who've never run a business. Who are you? Who are you to sit in judgment of me, turn around and walk out? Now, that would be a earthquake. I don't know any businessman with the balls to do it, not even Elon Musk. So, but it would be great to see. I mean, I remember during the great financial crisis, they called the bankers over, and the bankers would sit in front of Congress, and some congressman or senator would say, what about those collateral debt obligations? And I would love to one of those congressmen, one of those bankers, to say to the Congressman, what is a collateral debt obligation? I mean, you're throwing this word around. Do you know what it means? And I'm willing to put money, as the congressman would have to then rush over to his interns and say, go check on Wikipedia what this is, because they have no clue what they're talking about. So my view is these businessmen are engaged in self-defense. They have to protect themselves. So they have to lobby. Now, when they do that, are they going to protect themselves against competition? Absolutely. And is that wrong and evil? Absolutely. But let's put the fault, the blame where it actually belongs. And the blame belongs with the politicians, and blame belongs with us, because we give the politicians the power. We give the politicians the authority. We cheer the politicians on when Katie Porter, that horrible human being, congresswoman from Southern California, who takes out that little whiteboard every time she's in front of a CEO and asks him these complicated questions and then doesn't let him answer the question and just paints him as just an evil bastard. These are horrible people that we have allowed to govern us. And, CEOs of big tech are doing the best that they can. And yes, they are going to manipulate the system to their favor. That's a tragedy, but that's a tragedy of the system we created. And it's a tragedy of a system our politicians are enforcing. And our blame should be focused on our politicians, not on the business leaders.
So, it's kind of interesting because when you mention that these politicians are not capable of understanding the businesses, the specialized businesses in particular, like technology, and then you see these like heavy anti-tech politicians like Josh Hawley, like Elizabeth Warren, and yet, they think they're protecting the public, but in fact, it might have a chilling effect on the public. I'm wondering if you could talk to that a little bit. Like, is there, I know you might want to bash Josh Hawley for a second. Go ahead and tee off on Elizabeth Warren. But I'm wondering, like, is there a solution you're on? Like, do we need regulation at all? Like, should the marketplace just regulate itself?
I mean, I'll just say, I don't think they care about the safety of the public. I don't think Josh Hawley considers the safety of the public for one iota. I certainly don't think Elizabeth Warren does. I mean, these are powerlusters. These are people who enjoy the limelight. And look, both of them are smart. I'm not going to say that Josh Hawley's not super smart. Well, would he go to Yale? He went to Ivy League school. I guess that means you're smart, at least technically. But these people are corrupt. Ideologically, they are monsters. They want to run our lives. They believe they are smarter than we are. They believe, and they want power over us. They want power over business. Maybe I'm not a psychologist, but maybe this covers up some inadequacies they have in themselves. But these are people who are powerlusters. Elizabeth Warren. Does Elizabeth Warren really think that inflation was caused by greedy supermarkets? I mean, is she really that stupid? I don't think so. But I think she knows that it's a great line. She hates business. She wants to regulate supermarkets. She'd love to have price controls because that gives her the ultimate power. So she is going to, articulate a line that I think a lot of the public, because they haven't studied economics, because they don't know, because they're busy living their lives and they're ignorant, will buy, that inflation was caused by supermarkets. I mean, it's one of the dumbest statements in all of economic history, right? Together with Trump's statement that trade is lose-lose, right? I mean, these people, either they're really, really stupid, and in the case of Trump, I think that's quite a possibility, or they think we're really, really stupid and they sell us these dumb lines in order to attain power. And I think they're successful in doing it because nobody pushes back. But these two statements about trade being, we lose because we have a trade deficit, which is, third grade economics, right? And Elizabeth Warren, inflation is caused by supermarkets being greedy. It shows that what they're really after is not knowledge, but power. All they care about is power. All they care about is control. And they're leveraging the fact that we are too busy. You could say too dumb, but I think American people are not dumb. They're just too busy to actually check on our politicians and actually correct them. And here the blame is on, and I don't think I'm answering your question, so you might have to ask it again. The blame here is on the intellectuals. The people who should actually educate us, who actually explain things to us, who actually tell us what's actually going on in the world, are the intellectuals, the people who write op-eds in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the people who appear on television, the people who, for busy professional who needs to know what's going on in the world, can turn to something and somebody and they can explain it to him quickly and easily and simply. They, for the last 100 years, but certainly over the last couple of decades, have completely betrayed the American people. again, since 9/11, certainly they've completely betrayed the American people and allowed politicians to lie to the American people, to make stuff up in an effort to pursue power and pursue control. And the intellectuals have supported the politicians instead of telling the American people the truth about what's actually going on.
But why, Yaron? Like, it's hard for me to believe that politicians, elected officials, are not really looking out for the best interests of their constituency. They're not looking out for the best interests of me and you and our families. But you seem to believe that, actually.
I don't believe they're looking after that for one iota. Now, maybe they have convinced themselves in some deluded states that they are, but they're evading. They know they're not, and they're doing it in spite of that. And look, this is not new. Why did kings and queens and councils and tribal leaders do what they did for millennia? Why did religious leaders lie to their congregations? Why do political leaders lie to us all the time and have for all of history? I mean, I think the United States was unique in all of history in that in its Declaration and Constitution, basically said the people are sovereign. You guys know better how to live your lives than we know how to run your lives. But that's like a blimp in all of human history. It's lasted like 100 years in a human history that's lasted 100,000 years. And I think part of it has to do with, going back to Plato, right? Plato believed, and I think he's been the most influential philosopher and most influential thinker in all of history. Plato believed that most of humanity was not capable of taking care of itself, need to be guided, had no brain. Basically, his metaphor of the cave, we sit in a cave, all we see is shadows. We never see anything real. We just see the shadows of the real things. And therefore, we don't know what's true and what's not, what's right and what's wrong, what's going on. And we need philosopher kings to guide us. They go outside and they see outside the cave and they know the truth and they see the sun and they need to teach us and they need to guide us. They need to dictate our lives to us. I mean, in Plato's Republic, they decide everything for us. And that's the world in which, politicians live. They think, or they have deluded themselves into thinking, that they need to guide us. So somebody like Elizabeth Warren, goes through this, I think, rationalization. She says, look, if we blame Biden's spending and stimulus package for inflation, then Biden might lose the election. Biden lose the election, Trump will win. Trump is really, really bad for the American people, really awful. So we need to do whatever we have to do in order to elect Biden. One way in order to re-elect Biden is to deflect inflation onto somebody else. It's to convince the American people it's not Biden's fault that inflation is there, and therefore we'll come up with stories. I've got a bunch of economists who are willing to come up with stories that deflect inflation onto business. And Americans hate business or don't trust business to begin with. So this is a good opportunity to leverage that, all in order to elect Biden. And think about Trump. Trump, at some point, somebody said to him, asked him a question in a Q&A and said, but what you said was not true. It was a lie. And Trump said, but it worked. And it's exactly his mentality, and it's exactly most of our politicians' mentality. And if we link it up to another philosophy, there's a very uniquely American philosophy that goes back to William James and John Dewey called pragmatism. And pragmatism basically says, whatever works, that's good, right? If lying works, okay, and it's all short term because we can't project about the long term, and there's no such thing as principle. Principles are out because reality is too complicated. Things move too fast. We're not capable of projecting into the future. So whatever works in the short run, that's what we do. That's what works. That's what's good. And that and Plato, that mixture is what guides our politicians. And they think that they are they think they're helping us by electing, in Elizabeth Warren's case, they think they're helping us by electing Biden over Trump because we are too stupid to elect him ourselves. So they're going to lie to us in order to get him elected, which is a good cause.
It's very extreme, right? Like when you talk about Biden, you're talking about far left progressive. When you talk about Trump, you're talking about the right. What do you think it will take? And do you think it's feasible at all to find somebody to turn the face of politics around, to get it back to where you think it's a good thing, where it's not just about the power grab and actually people are representing their constituency and looking out for their constituency's best interests? Do you think that's even feasible again?
Well, it's going to take a real intellectual revolution, and we might get somebody a little bit more moderate than Biden or Trump at some point. It's hard to see, and that won't last for very long because moderation doesn't usually last for very long, and then, unless you really have an intellectual shift. And I don't see where the intellectual shift comes from, because part of our problem is we expect too much of our politicians. The politicians take care of their community. I mean, the whole point of politics is not to take care of us. The whole point of politics is not to determine what's good for us. The whole point of politics is to protect us. That's it. Protect us from crooks and frauds and murderers and terrorists and foreign invaders. And they can't even do that, right? They can't even do that. Defund the police, right? So you get crime spikes. Or let's give money to Iran. That'll really help protect us from terrorists and so our politicians don't do that, and we don't call them on it. Nobody called Biden, or very few people call Biden on releasing funds to Iran or trying to negotiate a deal with them. Nobody called Trump on signing a peace deal with the Taliban. Nobody called Trump on groveling before the brutal dictator of North Korea.
Why not? Why aren't people calling them out for this stuff?
Because people don't believe in anything anymore. So this is why it's going to be an intellectual revolution. What you need is to return to the mentality, the philosophy, the ideas of the founding of this country. Basically, the ideas of, look, individuals have reason. They have the capacity to take care of themselves. They have the capacity to figure out what's good for them. Politicians stay out. Political leaders stay out of the way. Individuals can take care of themselves. And then the idea that what matters are individuals, not groups, not tribes, not collectives, but individuals. And individuals should be left free to live their lives, because government intervention is always the use of a gun, the use of force, and force should only be used in self-defense. And therefore, the role of government is a self-defense role. It's to protect us. It's to provide self-defense against the criminals and against the terrorists and foreign invaders. And otherwise, so is to create a space that is free of violence so that we, individuals, can take care of ourselves. Now, that is the exact opposite of all the political thinking that exists today, both on the left and on the right. All politicians go into politics because they want to take care of you, of me, or they want to have power over us. The whole principle is, and this is why in the 19th century, to be a politician wasn't that big of a deal, because you didn't have a lot of power. You couldn't do that much. You basically were there to kind of keep up to date with property rights and other protections of rights, and make sure these rights were violated. Foreign policy was important, always is important, because of potential violations, invasion, and things like that. But otherwise, there was nothing to do, right? Congress didn't meet very often. Most congressmen were expected to have a profession, to work, because they only met for like less than half, for like 3 months a year or something like that, because there wasn't anything to do. That's the kind of politics we need to come back to. I always celebrate when the government shuts down, because everything Congress does today is damaging to us. So what we need to return to is a world in which individuals are trusted to live their lives for themselves. And that's going to require a shift in our thinking about education. It's going to require a shift in thinking about individuals, thinking about reason, and certainly going to require a shift in thinking about politics. I do think politics is downstream from culture, and I do think culture is downstream from ideas. We have to change ideas, which will change the culture, which will change our politics. And there are no shortcuts, which is a depressing thought, because this takes a long time.
Yaron, could you name a couple of like modern day thinkers that can sit at the top of the pyramid that you just described, at that idea tier?
I mean, good thinkers?
Yeah.
Not consistently good thinkers, no. I mean, there's certainly people who have better ideas in certain areas, but I would say there's some good economists. There's some good defenders of the Enlightenment. I'm all for, people like Steven Pinker defending the Enlightenment. But would I take political advice from him. No. I'm all for Sam Harris on certain issues and the way he approaches certain issues, but then he's completely corrupt when it comes to something like free will. So I think there's, our thinkers today are a lot of the thinkers who tend to be on the right are now becoming more and more religious, not less religious. So they're becoming more and more influenced by religion, which I think is a corrupting force. Our thinkers on the left become more and more corrupted by kind of postmodernism and the woke. There's some people kind of in the middle struggling to not be woke and not be religious, and there are not many of them, but they're mediocre, right? And they're not very good. So there's some people who are kind of left of center that are trying to be moderate. But moderation, it's not time for moderation. It's time to be radical. It's time to be extreme. Extreme for freedom, extreme for liberty. And there's just, I don't know of a voice that's like that. I mean, again, there's some economists that do a good job, but as a consistent voice for liberty and freedom, Ayn Rand, going back to Ayn Rand was kind of it. And we don't have that today. We don't have even more moderate voices like, I don't know, von Mises, who was a great economist, or Friedman, or even a Hayek, who wasn't that great on many things, is a superstar as compared to what we have today.
So society is devoid of thinkers today.
It's devoid of good thinkers. Yes, it's very much devoid of good thinkers. There's a real vacuum of good thinkers who can think consistently across areas.
So it's not just at the political level, Yaron. Like, I think it goes down to the street too. Like, if you look at, all the protests, quote unquote, that we've seen in major cities, including here in New York City, this isn't really civil disobedience to me. It's again just playing back into this concept where they're not good thinkers. They're not really rational and intelligent thinkers. It's just maybe, as you alluded to earlier, like they're taking the narrative of groupthink, oppressed versus oppressor. What would Rand say as it relates to civil disobedience today? And what's her philosophy as it relates to civil disobedience?
I mean, she supported civil disobedience on a number of premises. One, that the cause was a good cause. And two, that you are willing to pay the consequences. That is, if you engage in civil disobedience, you're going to get arrested, and you should accept that. You shouldn't fight it. It's why you're doing what you're doing. You're trying to engage in what is civil disobedience about? It's not a revolution. It's about raising awareness for a particular cause. Getting arrested is part of that, part of the process of civil disobedience. But I mean, she would look at what's going on today and just. She would be horrified, as I think many of us are. I mean, the cause that these people are fighting for is one of the most evil causes ever, right? I mean, they are basically promoting the rape and murder, uncontrolled rape and murder of civilians, of Jews in particular, but not only Jews, anybody who's affiliated with the Jewish state, murdered. They're aggressively advocating for genocide. And, and the treatment they get is, well, they might be wrong, but they have a right to protest. They certainly have a right to protest. They don't have a right to take over people's property, and they don't have a right to occupy buildings. They have they can protest, but nobody is condemning them for the evil that they represent. They literally, compare them to civil rights movement, or even compare them to the 1968 occupation of Colombia, which was horrible and disgusting. 1968, which was against the war in Vietnam, and they occupied a building and they did things that were wrong, right? But at least they were fighting for something that was reasonable, right? They stopped the war in Vietnam. We don't want to draft. These were young kids that didn't want to go to war. So it had a real impact on their lives, and it had a real impact on Americans. Here, they're occupying Colombia for a conflict that has no relevance to their life. It's far away, and they're siding with the really, really bad guys. They're siding with evil. And there's no consequence to that. It's like, yeah, okay, they're overdoing it. They should have occupied the building, and they were a little violent. But here they're arguing, a river to the sea. They can't name the river. They can't name the sea. So that's their stupidity and ignorance. But basically, river to the sea is a call for genocide. It's a call for one state where there are no Jews. Where do those 8 million Jews go? Who knows? I mean, they go home. They go back to where they came from, right? Global jihad. Global jihad is basically kill all Westerners. What is jihad? What is jihad? Oh, global intifada. Sorry, global intifada. What is intifada? Intifada is a revolution. A revolution against what? A revolution against Israel and Jews. It's about killing Jews. Intifada was buses blowing up, people, suicide bombers walking into cafes and blowing themselves up and killing civilians. It's about killing school children. That's what intifada means. These people are advocating for the worst kind of evil, literally, the destruction, murder, and rape of indiscriminately. They're advocating for this, and they're being hailed by some as heroes and by many with indifference. And there's almost nobody actually saying, you people are evil. You should be ashamed of yourself. And you should be silenced because we have free speech, but you should be shamed. You should be shamed in every institution. I mean, think about the institution of Harvard or the institution of Columbia or the institution of Penn accepting this and just saying, well, there's disagreement and they have a voice and it's legitimate. And I mean, imagine if the Nazis were right, there's no difference here. Imagine if the Nazis were marching on the Harvard, what do you call the Harvard square there?
Harvard Yard?
The Harvard Yard. Or
right.
if the Ku Klux Klan was marching at Harvard Yard, I mean, it would be unthinkable. But what's the difference? In many respects, what is a global intifada mean if not lynching? If not lynching of Jews, right? It's exactly the same as Ku Klux Klan. It's exactly the same as the Nazis. And yet these people are treated with respect and as if and with legitimacy to their point of view.
Let's break it down a little bit further. It's kind of interesting if you look at the individual protester. Do those protesters think that there is an actual cause that they're fighting for? Like when you reference the Vietnam War or civil rights in the 60s, right, with like Kennedy and MLK, like that seems very different than where we are today. So do the protesters today think that they're doing something that's important? Do they think they're moving society? Is it maybe just even something like a deeper psychological issue where they feel like they're validating their existence and therefore they're a part of a movement?
I mean, I think you can split the protesters up into various. I think some people are just joining the protest because it feels good to be part of a movement and do something, and they're clueless. They're just ignorant, stupid people. You ask them, what does intifada mean? You ask them what river, what sea it is. They have no idea. Then there are people who believe that, yeah, the Palestinians are being oppressed and the Palestinians deserve to have their own state. And they don't know the details and they don't know what's going on. And they're not, again, they're kind of combination of dumb with this general notion of Palestinians seem poor. They seem to be oppressed. And my professors have told me that the Palestinians are oppressed. So I should support the Palestinians because they're oppressed. And I know the Israelis are the oppressor, and therefore they're the bad guys. So they're just buying in kind of in a dumb, mild way, in a dumb kind of way, what their professors have taught them. And look, let's be very, very clear. All these protesters are being promoted and are the consequence, direct consequence, not indirect, direct consequence of what they're being taught in the classroom. This is a direct cause and effect. The professors are to blame. So let me get to the third group, which is the most important group. The third group, and this includes the professors and the student leaders of these things, these are nihilists. These are people who want to see Western civilization burned to the ground. They hate America. They hate Israel. They hate Israel because it represents Western civilization. They don't give one iota about Palestinians. They don't care about Palestinians one bit. They just want to see it all burn. And these are the nihilists who joined the Nazi Party. These are the nihilists who, were at the forefront of, what was it, Mao's Cultural Revolution, go kill all the scientists, go kill. These are the people who enjoy slaughter. They enjoy burning down. And unbelievably, there turns out there are not just a few of those. There are a lot of those on American campuses led by nihilistic professors who have been teaching them the benefit, really a nihilistic philosophy, call it identitarianism, woke, postmodernism, which is pure nihilism. It's hatred of the good for being good. It's hatred as the primary motivation for doing anything, because there are no values, there is no meaning in the world. All you can do is fight the oppressors in the name of the oppressed and burn it all down. And this is hatred for America, which is at the core, a big part of this. Nihilism demands that because we're successful, because we're entrepreneurial, because we're individualistic, because we're relatively
so irrational.
That's why they hate it. It's irrational, but again, human beings being rational is like new and revolutionary, right? This is, we live here in the 21st century, but rationality has only been a thing for 250 years. And then it was a thing maybe for a while in Greece, but all over the rest of history, rationality was out. We believed in all kinds of gods and all kinds of mystical nonsense. We did what our leaders told us to blindly. Most people didn't have time for rationality because they were too busy dying, subsistence farming or watching their kids die, because over half the kids died before the age of 10. People don't know this, but before 300 years ago, that was life or non-life. So the whole idea of rationality is new. The whole idea of using reason is new. And maybe we're just not ready for it yet. And we're going to have to go through another period of complete disaster before we wake up to what human nature really is. I mean, Aristotle defined human beings as the rational animal. We fight that every day, it looks like, in our culture.
Well, like going back to the concept of rationality and tying it to regulation, do you think that's rational?
No. I mean, it assumes so many things. It assumes the regulators know what they're doing better than the industry itself. I mean, when is that ever the case? I mean, do the regulators, who are usually just political bureaucrats, do they really understand AI? Does anybody in the government really understand what's going on? I mean, the industry itself is struggling to figure out what's actually going on with AI. And our regulators would know. And so all they can do is shut stuff down. And look, what regulators have is a blunt tool. They have force. And the only legitimate use of force is to protect individual rights, to protect us from fraud, to protect us from criminals. Industry is not criminal. Now they commit fraud, so when they commit fraud, put them in jail. But until they commit fraud, you have nothing to regulate. There's no reason to use force against business people.
Well, it's kind of interesting, Yaron, if you break down artificial intelligence and governments and big businesses with regulation. So this concept of centralized artificial intelligence versus decentralized artificial intelligence. I don't know if you've covered this area yet, but it's really interesting if you start to see like the race to the top between China and the United States. Centralized AI driven through the United States and China, I think, could be equally as dangerous. Take it a step lower. I think the idea of centralized artificial intelligence from corporations, including companies like Google and Microsoft, I think that could be dangerous. I think Zuckerberg's doing actually an incredible job right now with regards to open source and Meta for AI. He's actually really been advocating, which people didn't think he would do. But have you looked at this dynamic? It's really an interesting thing if you start to think about it, like the power of artificial intelligence, if it's controlled by these central entities, China, US, Microsoft, Google, it could be equally as bad, in my opinion.
So I don't put Microsoft and Google in the same bucket as China and the US. AI in the hands of China and US, really, really, really scary. And you can see that in China, where they've got AI monitoring people, facial recognition and what you do, and algorithms determining whether you get a loan or you don't get a loan based on your social score and how you behaved and whether you've criticized the regime lately or anything like that. And that's just the beginning. I mean, they're just going to get more and more sophisticated and therefore more and more controlling. So AI in that realm, where it is backed up by guns, backed up by force, backed up by regulations and by rule of law or the rule of unlaw, that is dystopia. That is that is really evil, and that is what should be shunned. And that's why government should stay away from AI. Have a minor uses for it in military, but other than that, government should not be allowed to use AI. Even I'd go that far. But I don't have any problem with Microsoft and Google, none at all. As long as they have to compete, and as long as I have alternatives, then go for it. And what can they? I'm not afraid. I don't worry about AI.
Well, if these big corporations are training the corpus of an LLM, then their agenda is what will come through the LLM. I think you've seen, like you mentioned woke, for example, a minute ago. Like I think you saw just a month ago or so, a lot of woke comments coming through, a lot of woke commentary coming through some of the big corporation AI.
And we saw backlash to that. And what's the alternative? The whole point of LLM is you're training it on known knowledge.
Well, the alternative is open source, right? Like what Meta is trying to do, where we have a lot of different points of view, all building and creating more innovation on top of AI.
But the points of view that the AI is going to learn from are the majority points of view. The majority points of view are awful, are terrible, are horrible, right? So most indications. So let's say the LLM gives a high score to academic papers because it's academia. Well, but academia is overwhelmingly dominated by the left. So it's going to give a higher score to anything that has a leftist bias. And I can't blame the LLM or the programmers. How are you going to rank them? How are you going to give scores, even if it's open source? What are you going to do? I mean, the fact is that people on the right don't go into academia. They don't write. So they have a few think tanks. But the number of papers they produce far smaller than the number of papers the left produces. So the left is going to dominate LLMs. Just accept that. The idea that somehow you can avoid that is absurd unless you have a right-wing LLM. And then you're doing exactly the same thing, but the opposite.
The same thing.
An LLM, by definition, cannot be objective because objectivity requires a human mind. Only human beings can be objective. Objectivity means human beings identifying reality. Objectivity doesn't mean taking into account all points of view because most points of view are nonsense. Objectivity means the search for the truth, which means interacting directly with reality. And only human beings can interact with reality. Only human beings can tell an LLM what's true and what's not, what is objective and what's not. So the LLMs, by definition, are going to give us societal bias. And we just have to accept that and then work with it.
I'm laughing because then you get these like big anti-tech politicians who really aren't familiar with the technology at the level you're talking about. And like, essentially, if they're not looking at it from the human side, the objective side, are they just regulating math? You know what I mean? Like, that's all they're doing, right? At the end of the day, an LLM is algebra.
They're regulating the outcome of math, the outcome of a statistical algorithm. That's all an LLM is.
That sounds so absurd.
Right? It's a kind of statistical algorithm that, and basically, if woke dominates the media, the LLM will be woke. And if Christianity dominates the media, the LLM will be Christian. The LLM can't discover truth. Truth is not something an artificial thing can contemplate. It can't because it doesn't contemplate. Artificial intelligence has no intelligence. It's not intelligent in the human sense. It doesn't integrate data from sense collection and actually conceptualize it. It just accepts what it's being given and it manipulates it using statistical tools. But all that can do is, it can tell you what is commonly available out there. It can't tell you what is true.
But it could empower the individual, right? Like, so if you think about generative AI and its ability to help the individual write music, write scripts, create videos, create films, and then, give them economic opportunity to compete against the legacy, let's say, creative fields, Hollywood, publishing, fashion industry. The individual could flourish from using these technologies. They would never be able to compete with big film studios, but now they can in a more efficient way from a time perspective,
Absolutely.
A money perspective, and even creatively, right?
So AI is this amazing tool that's going to change the world. It's not going to change the world because the machine is going to do the thinking for us. It's going to change the world by providing us with a tool that makes us much smarter and gives us access to an array of information and ability to manipulate data. Like if you've seen this stuff, text to video stuff, is stunning. It's stunning, the ability of AI to create video, right? Not to copy video, but to create it. So this is a tool that's going to change everything. It allows us to take massive amounts of data in biotech and figure out how proteins fold and come up with new proteins that we've never even been able to conceive of. But it's not going to tell us truth. It's just going to give us information, though, then we need to decide is it true or not. And we need to then guide it in order to create something of use and something of benefit. But it is going to change the world. And I think that the result of that is people are afraid because they don't understand it, and they don't know it, and nobody's making the effort to explain it to them. Everybody's so obsessed with AI is going to become conscious, going to take over the world, and that's what all sci-fi movies are about. Instead of actually some adult, some AI scientist just explain this to us, and for example, explain to us why it won't come alive. Life is a biological phenomena, for example, and not a 0-1 phenomena. And there is a difference between biology and computers. They're not the same. And I mean, and explain to us how our lives are going to be better from this. I mean, there is a movement in Silicon Valley of kind of tech optimism that Marc Andreessen and others are talking about. And I'm excited about that because they're trying to bring reason and rationality to this discussion. But our politicians are going to, politicians feed on fear. Fear is how they attain power. You're afraid. They convince you that your fear is justified, and then they convince you that only they can relieve you of the fear. Trust them; they will take care of it for you, and that's how they attain power. Whether it's fear of immigrants, or fear of trade, or fear of the other, fear of Jews, fear of AI. Don't worry, we've got it under control. Just vote for us and we'll take care of it.
Can technology push back against that, Yaron? Can technology, for example, help those individuals who are living in oppressive regimes to, get free speech, to topple governments? During the Arab Spring, we thought that social media was going to help, but it really hasn't done anything. If you look back in time now, it really has not helped. They're still living in oppressive regimes. So does tech, it's kind of interesting. I've had conversations with colleagues in China, for example, where focusing on cryptocurrency, they've said to me, this is great. I can now get paid how I want to be paid without government intrusion. I could use NFTs to move content back and forth that I wouldn't be able to access otherwise, including like Netflix movies. Can technology help those individuals in oppressive regimes?
Yes, but technology primarily amplifies whatever's in the culture. So in Arab Spring, for example, in Egypt, what the technology amplified was the Muslim Brotherhood. And then so when you got an election, Muslim Brotherhood won, and everybody was surprised. I wasn't. I was like, look, technology didn't change the culture. The culture was Muslim Brotherhood. All the technology did is amplified them and gave them a voice, and then they took over. And then everybody regretted the Arab Spring, right? Because it led to technology led to the civil war. The Arab Spring led to civil war in Egypt, in Syria, which has killed tens of thousands, nobody cares, and displaced millions, and just being horrific and barbaric. And that's what it led to. And what did technology do? It amplified a million different horrible voices within Syria, because it's not like there are any good guys in Syria, right? They're just degrees of evil among the different Syrian parties fighting each other. They all hate. They're all bad. They're all anti-freedom, but they're all anti-freedom in different ways and in different variations. They all hate each other. So technology does that. Now, if you already want to be free, then yes, if you're in China and you want freedom, then yeah, you want to get your money out. Crypto is a good way to get your money out of China using crypto. If you want to watch a Netflix movie, you can do that. But is that going to change the regime? Is that going to have an impact on your day-to-day life beyond being able to move your money around or watch a movie that they don't let you? Maybe in the very long run, because you'll get used to having a little bit of freedom. But they had more freedom 10 years ago. I mean, I was in China up until 2018. I was in China pretty regularly, and freedom was increasing in many respects. And then starting in 2016, 17, 18, it started clamping down. And what did the Chinese people do? Nothing. They accepted it. So the fact that they have a little bit of freedom doesn't mean they're not willing to give it up.
Is it like a human condition where like we individuals anywhere on the planet don't want freedom, or we shy away from freedom?
It's certainly not the case, as George Bush said, that freedom is the heart of every human being on the planet. Freedom is a massive achievement. A massive achievement. Like, for, how long have human beings been around? As Homo sapiens, a few 100,000 years. How many of those years have free? Have human beings been free? Like 200, 300, including the city-states in Greece, maybe 400, 500 years we've had freedom. The rest, 99.99% of human life has been lived under no freedom. The reality is that freedom is a massive achievement. And you can't appreciate what's going on in the world unless you realize kind of how much people fought for freedom and how, and the kind of intellectual battle that they had to fight. Greece and the Enlightenment are the two most important periods in human history, because they're the periods in which people fought for freedom. They fought for the ideas that necessitated freedom. And, today the Enlightenment is poo-pooed by the left because it advocates for reason and individualism. It's poo-pooed by the right because it's anti-religion. Everybody's abandoned the Enlightenment. If you abandon the Enlightenment, you abandon liberty, you abandon freedom. And people are willing to do that, in the name of comfort, in the name of security, in the name of, I don't have to think for myself. Life is rough. It's shocking. I mean, look how many people live in Russia today. They just accept Putin. They just accept it. They don't fight it. They don't, maybe they don't like him, but they don't fight it. And they're not even willing to get up and move, right? So a lot of young people, when the war broke out, left Russia to Kazakhstan and Georgia, but a lot stayed. Look at Iran. 30% of the population is pretty secular and would love to replace the regime and have gone out and demonstrated. 30% is really, really conservative and believes in this regime, and they want to be slaves. And then there's 40% that just doesn't care. They're just struggling with day-to-day life, and they're not willing to change anything, and they don't want to be free enough to go out to the streets or to risk anything for it. So you've got 30% who doesn't want to be free, 40% who is not willing to risk anything for freedom, and 30% who want to be free, but they're only 30%. I mean, how many people in America would have signed the Declaration of Independence and gone to war with the British? If you put it to a vote in the colonies, it would have failed. Far less than 50% were willing to. What was the end of the Declaration of Independence? We stake our lives, property, and honor, right? Because they knew that if they lost, they would be hung, their property would be taken from them, and they put everything on the line. And some people rallied to their cause, and some people thought, too busy, and some people sided with the British, and that's always the case. And luckily for humanity, the Founding Fathers won, right? But the reality is that it's always a minority that is willing to fight for freedom. And that minority is shrinking because of bad ideas.
Yaron, at the end of my show, each guest finishes a sentence that I begin, and it starts with the name of the show, Some Future Day, which is a cool reference to James Joyce. So I'm wondering if you could do that with me.
Sure.
Okay. So in some future day, individual liberty and freedom will become
the mainstream, would become dominant in our culture.
All right. Yaron, thank you so much. You've given me so much of your time today and sage wisdom. Amazing talking to you. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, people can follow me on Yaron Brook Show. I'm on YouTube. They can follow me on Twitter, just my name. And I have a website, yaronbrookshow.com.
Awesome. Yaron, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
It's
Marc.
great seeing you today. I know your time is very important, so thank you so much for joining me today. For ongoing insight surrounding these important topics, you can join the conversation on my social media channels, including Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Marc Beckman. And to sign up for my newsletter on Substack, you can find me at marcbeckman.substack.com. To make sure you don't miss a show, be sure to subscribe to Some Future Day across all major platforms worldwide, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Special thanks to New York University for producing Some Future Day, and a big shout out to my producer extraordinaire, John Boomhofer, for being patient and always encouraging me to push through. Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day.